Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo with David, Mike, and Greg. And today, very special guest Rand Fishkin on our special dedicated Google Search API leaks extravaganza. So we'll be talking entirely about the leaks and what it means today. And Rand, as you know, most people listening to this or watching this are going to know who Rand is, but Rand is the founder and CEO of SparkToro and Snack Bar Studio, two different companies. And of course, everybody knows him in the SEO world from his days at Moz. So welcome, Rand. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk with us. And this is a really critical subject, and we want to unpack it with you over the next 30 minutes. So thanks very much.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. It's great to see you, Greg and Mike. We don't get to catch up much anymore, but it's wonderful to see your friendly faces. And David, Geraldine and I had such a good time seeing you and Emma the other day. And I feel grateful that you continue to be in my life. That's great.
Likewise.
So I'm glad we get to do this.
We feel the exact same way, and glad our choice of little T bakers was met with sufficient positive reviews from Geraldine, especially. So
I'm telling you, those local reviews from David Mim, you can't beat them.
He's one reviewer that takes it very seriously. So, all right. So Rand, why don't we start off with, I know a lot of people have probably read some articles, seen one or more of the videos that you've done. There's a lot of commentary online. There's a lot of chatter and a lot of people, Mike King is writing War and Peace length blog posts about this, which are helpful, but very long and dense. So people have some knowledge that the leak happened, but just give us a quick recap of what this is, and then we want to get into the kind of main themes, big points, things that impressed you, that people need to understand about it.
Yeah, sure. So this leak, we don't know if it was intentional or unintentional. We assume that it was an accidental leak, that someone inside Google accidentally uploaded this to GitHub, mismarked it as public. It should have been private. It appears to contain the core features and modules that can be called inside of Google's search API ecosystem, at least up until August of last year. That is the last noted change. So it is very recent. It could be more recent than that. There are plenty of 6-month periods in the documentation without an update or change. So all of that's possible. You can find things in there about large language models and the AI overviews that are potentially coming in 2024. So it's possible the leak contains data as recently as March of this year, which is when it was initially uploaded to GitHub. You can find the leak and play with it yourself and go searching around in there. It's currently hosted on Hexdocs, although lots of people have downloaded that now and uploaded a copy to their own website so that people can play with it. But the long and short of the answer to what is this, Greg, is that it's essentially 14,014 features, which is basically an element that could be called in the API inside of Google's search ecosystem. And that includes almost 8,000 elements that refer to web search, but thousands that refer to YouTube and Maps and local and Google News and search features inside of Android and Pixel and Google Lens, all sorts of things, right? So this appears extremely comprehensive. If you can fathom a thing that you thought might have been inside the Google search system, there's probably something referring to it in this leak, which obviously has a lot of people excited and has been now confirmed by Google to be real, although they're trying to tell people not to draw too many conclusions from it.
Yeah, they're spinning. Nothing to see here.
Nothing. At least they didn't say that. I think that would have been actually quite delightful if they had come out and said nothing to see here. I would love to see some humor from Google. I think that'd be just delightful.
Yeah. I wonder who they've locked up in the basement as a result of this. That's. But we don't need to spend any time speculating.
Sadly, the GitHub commit code, someone found it in there, and so it can be tracked back to the engineer who probably made this mistake. I feel bad for them.
It could have been a half hour before he was laid off. So
that's a fair point too, right? Like it's as we said, Mike, we don't know whether this leak is intentional or unintentional.
Well, the thing that I found kind of amusing is the sort of conspiratorial mindset that crept in here, and that this is really to distract from all the negative coverage of the AI overview, uh, you know, fiasco.
I,
I think that that's really very unlikely
It,
thing.
even for Google, that would be a pretty serious step to take, I think, in the
Imagine
conspiracy direction.
imagine the scene, right? They're all sitting around the table in a conference room, and the executives and the PR people, the external consultants, and it's like, I know, let's leak the API code, and that will get everybody,
oh,
on a different to change the subject. Unlikely.
Hasn't worked, because this morning in the New York Times there was a big story about how bad the AI overviews are for healthcare searches. So I don't think it's. I think that story is still very much in the press.
Yeah. Okay, so back to you, Rand. Sorry, we did digress here.
yeah. Oh, well, so I was just going to say, I think that one of the big things I am taking away, and for folks who don't know, right, SparkToro is not an SEO company. I haven't been formally in SEO for 6 years now, but obviously this stuff is deeply interesting to me as an entrepreneur and founder, and as someone who cares about the search world, and for 20 years tried to make SEO more transparent. This is the biggest leak in a quarter century. This is the most I feel like I have ever had the opportunity to know about Google's true inner workings since I started doing SEO in 2001. And, it's mind boggling to have this sort of dropped in my lap after I left Moz. I wish it had happened while I was there. But I think that for marketers, especially folks who are considering how to improve their businesses' rankings and traffic, or they're helping clients to do it, or they work on teams, I would suggest that you spend some time playing around in there. I think it's actually worthwhile to look at the API and understand what's possible to get just from looking at it, which is quite a bit, right? The API calls themselves are often annotated, right? There'll be detail in there, there'll be examples. They'll show how, hey, this site call can be applied to a subdirectory or to a subdomain or to a full domain. They'll give notes in there about what certain things mean. They'll reference other teams that can do things. So I think playing around in there is fun and interesting, even if most of it's over your head. Most of it's over my head for sure. The other thing I would suggest is there are some people, you pointed out Mike King, who I think has done an extraordinary job, but there are others who in the space are doing a deep dive analysis, taking it really seriously, finding the cross references, finding the patent applications and the DOJ trial evidence and the other statements, and connecting all this up and sort of building some roadmaps for people to follow. I think that is an absolute blessing. I think that is wonderful work. As my people like to say, a mitzvah.
Yes.
And I think that paying attention to those folks, finding those good resources, Mike King and otherwise, is just great. I think the people who are doing that work deserve that attention. I think we're going to know an incredible amount 6 months and a year from now that we maybe had guesses about in Google search, but never knew before. I formed a dozen different theories that I want to check out
Yeah,
already.
I think that was my big takeaway, which I talked to a client about earlier this week, is just, there aren't any, there are no weights applied to any of these modules, right? So we don't know, just because a search feature exists, we don't know whether Google's using it today, and if they are, how important it is. But what I think it sort of provides a sort of a menu of potential experiments we can run on these specific modules that look interesting to us, to understand, are they in play? How do they work? How prominent are they? And I think it gives us a couple of levers to pull in experimentation, which I'm kind of excited about, both personally as well as to watch the work of really smart people like Mike King, putting in the technical labor that I don't have the facility to do myself. So,
yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would point out, David, is you're right that there are no weights specifically applied. So it doesn't say, page rank is, I don't know, 40% of the score. I doubt that would be how they do things anyway. But one of the things that is in the document that I think is interesting is there are certain elements that are called all the time, that are just referenced across the board. Entities is a great example. there are so many features and functions and modules that call entity data and that use a particular graph. I can't remember if it's word graphs, some graph format for linguistics to basically map against entities. There's a whole bunch of detail about how they connect entities to a website or to a person's name, to a place location inside of local, for example, in maps. Like I said, I don't understand all of it, but I know that when Google says entities are important historically, we really should take them at their word. And similarly, you can see them calling Chrome data all over the place, right? That Chrome is essentially powering a huge amount of clickstream related data, right? The Chrome clickstream that they have on billions of devices around the world, that is powering a ton of what Google called in the DOJ trial the most important ranking factor, the most powerful ranking factor, Navboost. And then there's another term, glue, which you can also find in the API documentation, and glue applies to YouTube and Maps and I think Android and several other sort of non-web search bits of Google search. So I look at those ones where we see a reference point all over the place, and I go, that must be quite important, right? That's a serious part of the ranking system.
So Rand, just a quick recap for people that maybe didn't read the DOJ exhibits or didn't follow that quick,
Sure.
that the trial. Um, Sort of unpack for just briefly Navboost and how that relates to the clickstream data.
Oh yeah, sure. So Google basically has this project inside of the search team. I believe it was for a long time run by Paul Har, who ran the Google Clicks team. That was what appeared on his resume. That resume was, I believe, introduced as evidence in the DOJ trial, but I think was actually leaked as part of something I'm not going to mention. But his resume notes that essentially, he worked on the Clicks team, which became Navboost, and over time was one of, if not the most important factors. And then there is an email that was introduced into evidence in the DOJ trial between one Google executive whose name I can't recall off the top of my head, and a bunch of other Googlers, including folks whose names you might recognize, people like Danny Sullivan are copied on that email. And in that, the Google executive says, Navboost is already the biggest ranking factor in our search engine. And he notes that this actually made some of the other teams inside Google Search upset, that their contributions to Google Search were not as important as Navboost. Navboost is, we now know, essentially using click data, which we already knew that, but we didn't know where it came from. There was suspicion that it could have been Google Analytics. There was suspicion it could have been Google buying clickstream data or acquiring it somewhere else. And now we can see that it's coming from Chrome. Chrome, of course, is Google's browser, which they've had since 2006. There's now some insight and speculation that Chrome was actually created in order to power Navboost, in order to power the Clicks team.
I'm sure in part that's true. I'm sure in part.
Yeah. Certainly that theory fits with all the other evidence. But Navboost is essentially saying, from a practitioner's point of view, if a page, this is one of the more fascinating things that I had no idea of, if a page receives very little or no traffic in our Chrome clickstream data, we should not pass PageRank or topical PageRank or anchor text value or other link signals through the links that are on that page. So if you were link building on pages that get virtually no traffic, that was probably pointless for a long time. I didn't know that. I thought I went after plenty of links that probably came from pages with no traffic on them, and I feel a little bit like a putz for doing that now. It also indicates that Chrome clickstream data can power how Google chooses to show different features in the results. Should there be a maps box in this search? Should there be a set of YouTube videos? Should we show images at the top? Should we show news? That appears to also be coming from the Chrome clickstream. All of this is part of Navboost and or Glue.
Sort of a quick side point. Oh, go ahead, David.
To say, so Rand, your point about PageRank not being passed from
from pages that aren't getting Chrome traffic. I also noted that in their definition, I forget exactly which document this reference attribute was in, but there is an attribute called on-site prominence, which references the converse, which is essentially links on the homepage, which we already sort of guessed, but also links on quote unquote high craps pages, which are essentially high clickstream pages, pass more value than links on any other page. And so they're clearly using clickstream data, not just for sort of informing search results and search features, but also, essentially it matters for your site architecture where you're placing links to pages that you actually want to receive more traffic. So I thought it's fascinating just the breadth and depth of which they are clearly using clickstream data.
Well, and
so
this,
David, would you just translate that real quickly for the listeners into a practical example that came to mind from that?
Sure. So make sure that let's say that you have a page that's getting a lot of traffic from Google. You can see that in Search Console or Google Analytics or whatever the tool you have. You want to make sure that you're linking to the pages that you actually want to bring you money, that you want to rank better from the page that's already receiving a bunch of these clicks.
Thank you.
Yes. And it is unclear to me whether the internal anchor text passes, but it looks like it does. And so it might be a really good idea, for example, if you have a popular page, and David, you're right that it could be a page that ranks highly in Google and gets Google search traffic, but it could also be a page that gets a lot of traffic from your email list. It could get a lot of traffic from third parties pointing to it. It could get a lot of type-in traffic or direct traffic or bookmark traffic or traffic from an app, social media traffic. Doesn't matter because the Chrome clickstream is, everything.
It's capturing
and because
all
of that, if you were to have a page that is popular, that gets lots of traffic, Google Analytics would be a good way to find that. You might want to have on that page links to, hey, these are the top 5 most important pages on our site that we really are trying to rank higher. And these are the words and phrases that we're looking to bolster with them. Potentially you should point to those in those places. I was browsing a video game website recently, right? Because my other company is an indie video game provider. And I noted that they had taken the names of popular video games and, the word reviews or the word cheat codes or, these other things that they clearly want to rank highly for. And they had them on their popular category pages, right? Like our top 10 best new games of 2024. And they're linking to, whatever it is, Slay the Spire hints and, Stardew Valley cheat codes, whatever. Like, oh, interesting. I guess they really know what's up. It's pretty smart.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, as you said, David, that's there's some major implications for site architecture in this, which I can imagine people feeling sort of exhausted by the prospect of having to re-architect their sites in response to this, but it might be a smart move.
It gives you a punch list, right? You can just go down the list of your top pages in GA and make sure that your top 20 pages are all linked to from those. I mean, I don't think that's
I guess that's a major thing.
Depending on the size of your site, that's not a massive.
David, you gave me some homework last week. I'm going to give you some homework this week. Okay. Would you do that for us?
Yes, I would. I think our number one page is my reviews have disappeared from Google Business Profiles. How do I get them back? So we'll make sure that we link to our search game plan from that page. That's right.
All right. Good plan.
So the comment I wanted to make is the clickstream data, and then the being linked to on pages that get no traffic partly explains why citations have died, long tail citations have died, because a lot of those directories get no consumer traffic, and so the citations that appear there are not getting any value. They're not being valued by Google because those consumer sites. I mean, that's the missing piece in all of this, right? It's like we're all like, why have citations died? Well, it's because Google has their own data for GBP, but no, that's an incomplete explanation. This is part of that story.
Yep. Greg, how did I never think of that? This, that's what I love about this document.
I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it until David said that, and then it occurred to me. Well, this is the missing link in the citations are dying story. Is that those directories? I mean, we always have known that it doesn't make sense to invest in directories that aren't getting consumer traffic. But here's the clear explanation of why.
Well, one of the things I might suggest to people and recommend really is historically, for link building purposes and citation building and entity mentions, all that kind of stuff, a lot of us have paid attention to being on a high domain authority site, whatever domain authority metric you want to use, the one from Moz, the one from Ahrefs, I think SEMrush has their own, which are indicative, right? And they correlate with higher rankings, all that kind of stuff. But I might suggest that what you want to do actually is go look for high traffic pages, not high domain authority sites.
Right.
And
That's
go
a surrogate.
find those
That's a
pages.
proxy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. If I were at Moz, right, if I were still running Moz, I would change what, the Moz authority scores, the page authority scores. I would go buy, I think Moz is already buying data from SimilarWeb or Datos or one of those clickstream providers. And I would put information in there about how many clicks we estimate that page is receiving, so that someone could value pages based on their Chrome traffic, which is clearly how Google's doing it.
Do you think any of the like Edge or any of the Chrome spinoffs, Google is Chromium or any of the other base browsers sending Google
That's a great question, Mike. I want to ask Mike King about that, because I don't know whether the Chrome framework means that Google is able to see browser visits from people using that framework or not. I don't know.
Well, you would, given that it's Google, you would suspect that they would try to get that information.
Yeah, I certainly would.
But anyway, so there's still a few more things that I think, big things that kind of you've spoken about that we want to talk about before we sort of do anything deeper. The role of paid clicks in the clickstream and potentially boosting organic. That was really provocative to me. You talked about that in your most recent video, that if Google's tracking the clickstream, paid clicks are part of that. Is that having some positive impact on search rankings, given sort of the anecdotal, thinking that people have done about that in the past? Tell us more about that.
Sure. So for all the years that I worked in SEO, there was what I would call conspiracy theorists, although now I might take that back, and I probably need to issue some apologies. But conspiracy theorists who suggested that, hey, whenever we do a big paid search buy, I come to a new team, I go work for a new client, we do a big paid search investment or paid media spend, and we see a lift in organic traffic and in rankings. To which I would always respond, well, I think that's because other signals like links and anchor text and the content improvements that you're making and the traffic that's coming to the site and the awareness and people searching for it, I think that's what's lifting it. And I think that's still plausible, although now there's a much more direct explanation. And that is, when paid search clicks happen, even if Google is discounting the click on exactly the paid search result itself, it is almost certainly the case that if that page has proved valuable to anyone, they're going to email it to themselves. They'll bookmark it. They'll send it to a friend. They might share it on social media. They might put it in a Slack group. They might put it in a WhatsApp thread. They might share it on a webinar. They might include it in a presentation. They might email it to their company list. That will generate traffic and attention, which is suggestive of improved rankings. So, does paid search directly lead to improved organic? Probably not. Does it have an impact? Indirect, if other things, if other positive signals around that exist? Almost certainly. It is very hard for me to imagine that Google's built some sort of, machine learning system to sort of discount all traffic lift that will come when a paid search investment happens. I don't know why they do that. I think that would be against their interests, right? If a page is performing well on the internet and solving a potential searcher's problem, Google wants that page to perform well in their search index as well. And so, I often made fun of, for example, like the Washington Post was buying ads for recipes, for recipe links at the top of, you search for butternut squash recipe. And I went, what is the Washington Post doing? They rank number 2 for butternut squash recipe already. Did they really need to buy the paid search result? Is that just to get the click data about the keyword that's sending them traffic? Could that possibly be what's going on here? Now I have a theory that maybe the Washington Post was smarter than I thought, and they were knowingly driving traffic, or they didn't know why it worked, but it worked.
They observed a correlation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's talk about another really provocative topic, mentions versus links, and the distinction and what the impact of mentions might be. And so tell us what a mention is.
Sure. So for a long time, I think, David, when you and I worked together, I did some videos and I attempted to do some experiments around unlinked mentions. And this is essentially the idea that you would talk about an entity, a brand name or a person's name, reference a very unique keyword or phrase or something like that, the name of a movie, those kinds of things, and then see if that would potentially lift the rankings of the referenced item. So this is essentially, I'm talking about David Mim on my blog. Does that help David's website help rank a little better for whatever topics I'm talking about on that blog? If many, many people do that across the web, even if they don't link to David's actual website, there's no link that you can click, Google knows who David Mim, the local search expert, is. Presumably that could lift the rankings. And now we can see inside the search API that there are a lot of mentions of mentions, right? That in fact, Google has a bunch of architecture and systems for trying to decode whether a mention is a reference. What they have an estimate for how confident they are that a certain mention on a page refers to a particular entity. They have a system for connecting up entities to what they think are the official websites, especially for people's names and for the names of brands and organizations. And I can't remember if I saw stuff that referred to like movie titles and book titles and that kind of stuff. That's in there somewhere, but I don't know if it connects up to this.
Just a historical note here, web references was the original phrase Google Local used in 2007, both in their patent and in the business profile page, for pages that were citations but didn't have a link. Yeah. Right. So that was the word that was originally used, was web reference. And in local is sort of the canary in the entity coal mine. It was the first subject area knowledge graph that Google converted to a knowledge graph. Yeah. And those mentions carried over, and we've seen them in local forever, right? That brand mentions of a business is just not, maybe depending on where it came from and what page it was on, was as good as a link to a large extent.
Well,
so it goes a concept that's been around in local for 17 years, right?
It goes to prominence, right? Of Google's relevance, proximity, yes, and prominence. It's right. Explicitly mentioned in that laundry list of things that Google considers as part of prominence.
I hadn't read this document before, but now that you called out web references, I did a search, Mike, inside the documents. There is a warehouse repository for WebRef entities, and it notes in the notes about this information about links, for example, implications between annotated entities. So suggesting all annotations of this entity on the given document, information about the collections of the entity, metadata and raw signals used by the annotator. It sure sounds like, yeah, I want to read this more carefully and get in here, but this looks exactly like that. So for some reason, I didn't search for web refs before, but they are in here. Mentions of entities are also in here in a bunch of documents. And now I can see that there's even more scores and signals. So this is the kind of thing that happens, right? You think of, oh, didn't Google call that this thing once? I should search for that thing. And that happens regularly. For example, right now, guys, I'm very curious. Have you ever heard of something called keto score? Keto?
Not I. Nope.
Yeah, that one.
I only know that from the paleo diet, but otherwise no.
Google's got a bunch of funny naming conventions that do reference things like that. I have a feeling it has something to do with diet or healthiness of a web page. I'm not sure, but it is referenced. The keto score is referenced in
weirdness
relation
of
to
the
entities.
web page in keto's case.
Yeah. So, look, I think that if if I were practicing SEO, I would want to do much more significant testing around unlinked mentions. For folks who, like Will Critchlow, for example, no offense to Will, I love him to pieces. Geraldine and I are going and staying at his house in October, unless I throw him under the bus too hard.
Maybe not, depending on what you say.
Yeah, I love him to pieces. But when he said, "Hey, we're not changing any behavior here," that strikes me as quite odd. I would strongly encourage Will and his team and many other folks. I would really encourage them to go invest in unlinked mentions and see if that has the positive impact that it looks like these documents are referencing. It could change a lot of what's currently called link building behavior. There's a ton of link builders out there who, like myself, thought that mostly links count, that it was all about the, sort of getting them on high authority sites, that it was about getting them on a diverse set of pages and sites and trying to do that. And I honestly, as a link builder, I would change a lot of my behavior. I would shift it over to, let me go to pages that I think got high traffic and sites that I think get high traffic. Let me focus on mentions potentially over links, especially if a link is hard to get. Let's just get referenced.
Well, there's a lot
good
of
news for all of us who get mentioned in places like search engine land, but not linked to. Those references might still actually be helping us out. So
payoff.
Well,
Yeah.
don't tell Search Engine Land that they'll put XXX instead of
that's
Rand's
right.
name.
Yeah, it'll be redacted. Yeah.
It'll be Mavid Dim.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll call him, Scorpion. But anyway.
Code name.
So there's a lot of PR. We don't need to talk about this in particular, but there's a lot of PR implications for this, right? In terms of content and PR, it really would drive a very different strategy. And there's also sort of hope in a way for local businesses that can't really get links for lack of resources and just lack of visibility, that with a PR strategy or with newsworthy content, you might help yourself. That's always sort of been true, but this might make it a little bit more explicit tactically.
I think that's exactly right. And I apologize, friends. David's phone is dying, and I also have to make an exit. So I think we should unfortunately wrap up.
Well, we'll have to do part 2 at some point, because there's a ton of stuff. There's a ton of stuff we haven't talked about. So thank you very, very much, Rand, for being with us, and we will talk to you soon again.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks so much. See you.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.